Good morning, quilt people. How are you? I'm doing really well. Just wanted to get in here and try and do my weekly video. Although, full disclosure, I'm not really feeling like the process. I, go through times where additional information seems much more readily available to me, whereas other times it doesn't. And I'm going through one of those times right now, which just means, my resources are a little depleted and I need to rest and, just wait for it to come back, because it always does. And when it does, that's when I start writing books and I get, all the inspiration and it just starts to flow, but I'm just not quite there today. But I did want to still continue my weekly practice of doing this. Anyhow, so for today's topic, the answer in you, right? Because look at how much I have, in terms of thought constructs that I have managed to build for myself within my own mind, and also to kind of negotiate the world from that place. I feel like where we have been is kind of level 1, right? And I kind of feel like I've kind of had a bit of a graduation. That's why the last couple of videos have been a wrap up and kind of all this other stuff. But I'm kind of standing on the plateau of a new landscape, and I'm not quite sure what that looks like, but I know where I've been, right? And that's why I've been doing all these wrap up, videos and things like this. Where we have been is in addressing fear and pain. Right? And I feel like I've gotten a really good handle on those two things on my way to joy, right? And so now that we've kind of gotten there, and I know how to, at any time, deal with anything that feels like fear or pain, now that I've been able to fully address those and almost, I wouldn't say fully rid them from my life, but I know that when they show up for me, I know what it is, and I know how to address it, and I know how to deal with it. I love that, right? But the next, the last part that we've all been doing has been in terms of me versus the world and the judgment that I hold on that and everything that tends to kind of make me crazy. As the world does these days, right? And so that was kind of level 1. But now that I'm up out of that and I'm looking around at the new landscape of my understanding, that, and this is the thing about the work, you always think, okay, I graduated to a new level and whatever, all of a sudden you get out of, the basement of whatever that was, and you look around and you're like, oh, there's another 7 levels beyond that. And there always is. It never ends. The process of learning never ends, because one learning, one aha, leads you to your next, right? So anyhow, now that I'm kind of okay, dealt with that, and I'm looking at the landscape of my understanding, and the next level for me, and this is why I haven't quite gotten there yet, because it's so big. The first level, like I said, was in dealing with the outside world and separating ourselves and finding ourselves, quite frankly, what is me, what is not me, right? And especially in dealing with the judgment that we place on the world and others and that stuff. Okay, I know I already said that, but getting to level 2. Level 2 is applying all of those things that you've learned about the world out there and the things out there that make you crazy and the things that you hold judgment on out there. The next level is in ridding ourselves of judgment of what happens in here. If level 1 was getting rid of judgment on others and the world out there, then the next level for me feels like ridding myself of judgment in here. That's a really big thing for me, because I have judged myself, and harshly, through much of my life. And so I'm having to take all those lessons and internalize them in terms of me and my process, and allowing myself to be human and looking at everything that's been messy in my life and just saying, well, that's what learning looks like, right? Because learning is messy. So if that's where we are, and again, I'm not quite ready to start climbing the steps of reducing judgment of myself yet. Give me a second. But at least I know that that's where the work lies for me moving forward. I was able to take a class with Neale Donald Walsch yesterday. If you don't know who he is, he's the guy who wrote the book Conversations with God. And it was released, I believe, in the 80s, and it was such a game changer for so many people, because here's this guy, who wrote a book about his conversations with God. And that he believed those conversations with God that he was having were in fact true and from God. Like, it really shook the world, at least at the time that I was living in, because it was almost like heresy. Like, some guy was saying he could communicate with God directly, that you could just cut out the middleman, that you didn't need religion or a priest or someone else to translate the word of God for you, but that you could go out and find it for yourself and hold it as true for yourself. Oh, danger. I don't know what that was. Anyhow. Something's falling in the background. I'm sure it's fine. Peace and love and light. Anyhow. My class with Neale Donald Walsch yesterday. So, his book was so revolutionary at the time because it introduced, at least to my mind, the fact that I could have a direct relationship with Creator. That there didn't need to be another person, and that what I was receiving, I could in fact say was true for me. And that's all I needed. And that really set me on a new path in my life, because when I read that book at the time, it was first when Marianne Williamson was coming onto the scene, and like all that whole new age thing was starting to kind of percolate up in the late 80s, early 90s, especially in face of the AIDS crisis that, the LGBT community was just dealing with. Because we weren't just dealing with the AIDS crisis and our friends dying. We were dealing with faith communities and family members who were judging us for dying, who were judging us for being sick. So there was a great need at that time for this kind of messaging, this kind of conversation with God, that this person, Neale Donald Walsch, essentially handed me the keys to my own relationship with a higher power, right? And that was so revolutionary in my world because of the way that I was raised in a very kind of punitive Christian environment where you are nothing, you are bad, you are sin, we were all born sinners. Like, you don't have that kind of personal power and ability to go and have a conversation directly with God. Like, who are you, right? And so his book, like I said, handed me the reins to my own spirituality, that I could go out and seek what was true for me. In his class yesterday, the one point he kept trying to get across to us is that we are to abandon the concept of love and forgiveness. Because love and forgiveness can never be held together in one energetic thought, right? Because love is love. Love is the absence of judgment. And yet forgiveness requires judgment. Forgiveness implies that there is something to forgive, that there has been an error, that there is something wrong in the matrix. Forgiveness asks that there be a sin to forgive. A few videos back, remember I was just kind of chewing on the concept that God never forgives because he never judges? I said that a few videos ago. Well, this was kind of like a pickup of that concept that we must abandon the concept of forgiveness. There is nothing to forgive for anyone. Anytime, anywhere. There is nothing to forgive because there is nothing wrong. If we're trying to abandon the concept of good and evil, right? And that evil doesn't have to exist, and that we could just deal with what is good and right and love. In order to have forgiveness, you have to have sinned or done something wrong, right? And so you can see how that just lives in the world of the ego. It requires, right? In order to have forgiveness, it requires that something was done wrong, that there was sin. There is no sin. You cannot do something wrong. There is only God's plan. And God doesn't make those kinds of mistakes, right? Everything is as it should be. Everything is in good care, right? And it is all right on time. And that's not for us to hold a judgment on. It is merely there for us to observe and learn. So, forgetting forgiveness. Anyhow, moving on. I should light some sage or something. So if there's nothing to forgive, right? Forgiveness can't live in the same world as love, right? Those two things are, energetically polar opposites. Rather, Neale Donald Walsch in his class yesterday encouraged us over and over and over again to replace the concept of forgiveness with understanding. In one of our last videos, I was talking about how I will there be light. I will there be light means understanding. I will there be understanding in the world. So that no matter who you pull up next to, that you can learn about their story and understand that they are doing the absolute best that they can with what they have been given to deal with in this lifetime. If you pull up with anything that looks like judgment, that relationship is going to start to, come apart. But if you show up to them, no matter how ridiculous they're acting, and offer them understanding, that they are in fact doing their best and that you are just there to shed a light on them and their process and understand why they are the way that they are so that you can help elevate them through their process. Replacing forgiveness with understanding is where I am in my work. And that includes the judgment I hold on myself, right? I don't need forgiveness. I don't need forgiveness of what I've done wrong in this world, right? I need understanding from myself that all of those things, all the crazy, all the stupid, all the slightly regrettable, that I can provide understanding for myself, that was part of my process that I needed to get from where I'm going to where I am to where I'm going. So anyways, I don't have a ton of new info to try and process here now. I'm very much in between of level 1 and level 2, right? And level 1 was, finding ourselves versus the world. Level 2 is going to be finding ourselves amongst ourselves. Ooh. It's tricky, and it's a lot to process, and it's a lot to think about, but that's why I write books, right? Because all of these lessons, as I go through them, for me, my process is writing them into a modern day fable so that I can kind of extrapolate, okay, that's what that is, that's what this looks like, and this is how that whole concept would look like in a conversation. So I wanted to do a little bit of wrap up here and just talk about my books because I haven't really done much of that in a while. And I'm super excited about where I'm going right now because I have signed up with Paper Raven Books, who will be handling and publishing my books moving forward. So in my books, I use the Language and Light series, right? The Language and Light series to kind of model what is shamanism, because if you ask people what is shamanism, they have no idea. They're like, is it voodoo? I don't know. There's not a good understanding of how that translates into a daily practice for people. And so I wanted to write a series of books that would kind of illustrate what that looks like. So I started the series with book 1, Handsome Devils. And in this series, we have Nikolai Tesla, right? And we have Melvin Vaughn. Melvin Vaughn is actually who tells the story, right? It's from his point of view. And so Nikolai Tesla, in 1886, left pre-Nazi Austria for America. That's where this whole series starts. And it was the same year, actually, that conversion therapy was coined. And so there's this kind of bubbling up of all these things that kind of started to happen in 1886. And so when the story starts, Nikolai Tesla is leaving Austria for America, and he leaves Melvin behind, and that's where the story really begins. Melvin is then faced with trying to rescue all of these queer youth from being lobotomized. If you're not familiar with how conversion therapy originated, or the thousands upon thousands of lobotomies that were performed in the name of religion on queer individuals, I mean, there are doctors who have logs of thousands and thousands and thousands of queer individuals that they lobotomized between 1886 and 1986, when conversion therapy actively used lobotomy as a form of treatment. So I wanted to shed a little bit of a light on that because, you know, like all these faith communities are like, oh, we're the good guys. And I'm like standing there like as a queer individual, I'm like, do you know your history? Apparently you don't, so let me tell it to you. Right? And I didn't want it to come from a place of like, oh, you guys are terrible. It was just more like, this is our history, like, know it. And so this series is a little bit of historical fiction because it does actually follow the life of Nikola Tesla as we go through history. Nikola Tesla was historically a queer individual. He is noted and known for most likely being gay. He didn't have any relationships to speak of, but he was an intensely, kind of a loner. And anyways, I find his life endlessly fascinating, and he's one of my personal heroes. I can't even imagine what his life was like. Anyway, so book one is just kind of laying the groundwork of where they are in time and history and understanding the relationship between Melvin and Nikolai as lovers. At the end of book one, Handsome Devils, you kind of find out that Melvin Vaughn is not only a shamanic practitioner and a pagan, but also that he has shamanic abilities, which are delivered to him by way of his family lineage. You find out that he's kind of like part werewolf, and because I didn't really know how to translate my relationship with my wolf guide, in a way that like normal people would understand. But I thought that in making it a story where he was kind of part werewolf, where he was leveraging these kind of lupine abilities that he could access through his belief. Anyhow, so at the end of book one, there's these queer kids that he has to go and rescue from being lobotomized. And so he ends up with this kind of pack of like kids that he has to then be responsible for because they can't go back home to their families who were trying to lobotomize them because that's not safe. So he ends up with this, what I call Melvin's magic school for queer kids and shamanism. Right? So Melvin ends up with all of these young queer kids that he then has to train to fight against the, powers at be, which is, the Catholic Church and their kind of, crazy government at the time in the late 1880s. When Melvin gets all the kids, right, he then has to kind of train them in shamanic ways. And so that's where you start to really learn, what is shamanism and how powerful is it and how can you use it as a practice, right? An army awakens is when the kids all like start to come together under his tutelage and he starts teaching them, essentially which is the core of shamanic belief is how to win a war without fighting. And so he has to teach all the kids how to become powerful shamanic practitioners. And where does that happen? That happens up here, right? And so their lessons are where the warrior lives, and he teaches them where the warrior lives, and that it's better to be a gardener, it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war, right? And so that's this whole process of him teaching them the ways of the shamanic beliefs. And then in book number 4, there is one individual in the pack who you learn is not actually a young boy who's been saved from lobotomy, but rather it's actually a trans woman. And so that character's name is Christian. And so with Christian kind of discovering her truth and her abilities and her special ways in the world back then is Christian's Rapture. And you kind of learn about her journey as a, non-conforming, non-binary person back then and what that looked like. Book 5, Felix's Fight, is done and written, and I should be able to get that out in the next few months. But I'm not really focusing on that series right now. It kind of already had its launch and its big success, and it's off and running and doing well with book sales. But I've actually really come back to my original set of books, my trilogy, which began with the story that's basically loosely based on my life, Foreign to Me. Foreign to Me will always be the most personal and special book that I've ever written, because it's really my life story, but put onto a fictional character. Because unless you're Anne Frank, nobody really wants to hear your own personal story, right? Because it's all the same. We all had heartbreak, we've all done whatever. What's different about your story? So I wanted to make it a little bit more magical, and I wanted to kind of, depart from reality a little bit in order for the books to live in fantasy. And that's why I created, Jack Daw, who's the main character of Foreign to Me. And it's his personal journey. Book 1 is him overcoming himself, right? Thus the religious iconography of the crown of thorns. It's him overcoming himself in book 1. In book 2, he falls in love. And it is a story of 2 young handicapped men overcoming their own personal struggles, as well as their own personal story of trauma and what they have lived through in order to just get to where they are in life as powerful individuals. So it's a story of how 2 handicapped men learned how to move mountains. So that's book 2. Book 3, Made of Me, is the story of Jack kind of concluding his life's work. And it's an interesting story because I always try and write my books in the place where 2 polar opposites exist as one. Jack in the book, he's both extremely handsome and extremely ugly, right? Because he has a facial deformity and he just has a lot of other things going on. His physical journey with dystonia, which is, where I was able to unload a lot of that I've been through and what that's like. But not only that, I was able to, even in book 1, make Jack's dystonia, right, his crippling neurological movement disorder, become his superpower. And so that's what I wanted to do with that, just to, help me process my own journey with dystonia as well. But book 3, Made of Me, is where he really gets into his life's work and what he has learned in this lifetime. So those are my books, and I hope that you enjoy them. They are all LGBT spiritual fiction. That's kind of the genre they live. And if you're not sure what spiritual fiction is, do you remember the movie Celestine Prophecy? Anyhow, the guy who directed that film was kind enough to read my book and gave me a great review because his work lives in that world as well. Celestine Prophecies was one of the first big stories that lived in the world of spiritual fiction that, most people kind of know about. Anyways, that's kind of where we are today. Like I said, I don't have a lot to offer today in terms of my own personal process and work, but I did still want to do a video and kind of catch us up on this. Hopefully my flow, right, will start again. I'm just a little bit tapped out right now, which is fine. It always comes back. I just need a little bit of rest. So that's where we are today, and I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time. All right, bye.